Hello everyone. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is right now. That's how YouTube keeps sending you more chilling stories like this. And now, let the night begin with Story 1. The Cabin That Remembered Me. I found the journal on my third night there, and by then it was already too late to leave. The cabin was in northern Vermont, buried deep enough in the woods that my phone had no signal, and the nearest neighbor was supposedly 4 miles down an unmarked dirt road. I'd found the listing on one of those boutique rental sites, the kind that promises authentic solitude and disconnection from the modern world. As a freelance writer facing a brutal deadline and a complete creative block, that sounded like exactly what I needed. 3 nights, complete silence, nothing but me and my laptop and the pressure to finally finish the novel I'd been avoiding for 8 months. The place looked exactly like the photos. Small, rustic, clean enough. 1 bedroom, a wood-burning stove, a kitchen table positioned perfectly in front of a large window overlooking the forest. The owner had left a binder with instructions: how to work the stove, where the breaker box was, what to do if I saw bears. Standard cabin stuff. I spent the first evening settling in, making coffee, trying to convince myself that being alone in the woods was inspiring rather than unsettling. The first 2 nights were fine, productive even. I fell into a rhythm. Write during the day, take walks at dusk, read by the stove at night. The silence was exactly what I'd needed. No traffic sounds, no neighbor's television bleeding through the walls, no sirens or car alarms or any of the ambient noise I'd grown so accustomed to in the city. Just wind and the occasional animal sounds I couldn't quite identify, and the settling of old wood. But on the 3rd night I couldn't sleep, not because of any sound or disturbance, the opposite actually. The silence felt too heavy, too complete, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling restless and strange. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up and turned on the bedside lamp. That's when I noticed the drawer in the nightstand was slightly open. I'd looked in that drawer the first night just out of habit. You always check drawers and closets in rental places, right? It had been empty then, or at least I thought it had been. But now I could see something inside, a corner of what looked like a leather-bound book. I pulled it out. It was a journal, the kind with a leather cord wrapped around it to keep it closed. The leather was worn, soft with age and handling. I unwrapped the cord and opened to the first page. The handwriting was neat, compact, unfamiliar. The first entry was dated 5 years ago, September 14th. My hands went cold as I read the opening line. I arrived at the cabin today hoping the isolation would help me finish my book. I've been stuck for months. I stopped breathing for a moment. That was too close, too similar to my own situation. I told myself it was just coincidence. Lots of writers probably came to this cabin for the same reason. I kept reading. The entry continued, describing the writer's first day at the cabin in detail. They'd made coffee, worked at the kitchen table, taken a walk at dusk. They described seeing a deer near the tree line and feeling for the first time in months like they could breathe again. I'd seen a deer yesterday, in almost the exact spot they described. My heart was beating faster now, but I kept reading, flipping through pages. The journal covered what seemed to be a week-long stay. The writer described their daily routine: morning coffee, writing sessions, afternoon walks, evening reading by the stove. They mentioned making pasta with tomato sauce one night because it was the only meal they knew how to cook reliably without a recipe. I'd made that exact meal tonight. The similarities were unsettling, but I tried to rationalize them. Maybe the journal had been left here deliberately, some kind of art project or creative exercise by a previous guest. Maybe the owner placed it in rooms to give renters a strange experience, something to talk about. It was weird, sure, but not impossible to explain. Then I reached an entry dated 5 days into their stay. I found myself walking the same path through the woods today, to the clearing with the fallen birch tree. I've been going there every afternoon without really deciding to. It feels familiar, like I've been there before, though I know I haven't. When I got back to the cabin, I realized I'd been humming a song I didn't recognize. I can't get it out of my head now. I hadn't walked to any clearing. I didn't even know there was a clearing with a fallen birch tree. But for the past 2 afternoons, I'd found myself humming this strange melody I couldn't place. Something repetitive and oddly soothing that seemed to come from nowhere. I turned more pages, my hands shaking now. The entries became more unsettled as the week went on. The writer described feeling watched, though they never saw anyone. They mentioned small things being moved, a coffee mug placed on the opposite counter, a book they were sure they'd left on the table found on the windowsill. They wrote about waking up at odd hours with the feeling that someone had just been standing beside the bed. I keep telling myself I'm being paranoid, one entry read. The isolation is getting to me, but I could swear someone has been in the cabin. I found the journal I've been keeping. This journal moved from the nightstand drawer to under the bed. I know I didn't put it there. My mouth went dry. I checked the date on that entry. It was from the 6th day of their stay. I was on my 3rd night. I forced myself to keep reading, even though every instinct told me to stop. To close the journal and shove it back in the drawer and pretend I'd never found it. The entries grew shorter, more frantic. The writer described hearing footsteps in the cabin at night, seeing shadows move past the windows, finding the door unlocked in the morning, though they were certain they'd locked it. The second to last entry was barely coherent. I can't leave. I tried to pack this morning, but I can't make myself go. It's like something is pulling me to stay. I walked to the clearing again today. I didn't mean to, but my feet took me there anyway. The birch tree. I stood there for an hour and I don't remember any of it. When I came back to myself, it was getting dark. I need to leave. I need to get out of here, but I know I won't. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped the journal. I turned to the last page with writing on it, expecting to see an entry from 5 years ago. The date at the top of the page was yesterday. Yesterday. The day I'd arrived at the cabin. The entry was short, just 2 lines written in the same neat handwriting. She arrived today. She'll find this journal on her 3rd night, just like I did. By then, she'll already be walking the same paths, humming the same song, making the same choices. The cabin remembers. The cabin always remembers. Below that, in different ink, fresher ink, someone had added one more line. I found this journal tonight, and now I understand. That handwriting was mine. I dropped the journal like it had burned me. My own words, my own handwriting dated yesterday, but I hadn't written that. I'd never seen this journal before tonight. I couldn't have written it yesterday because I'd only found it 5 minutes ago. I stood up, backing away from the nightstand, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was impossible, some kind of elaborate prank it had to be. Someone had forged my handwriting, or the humming. I realized I was humming that melody again, the one I couldn't place. The same one the original writer had mentioned. My lips were moving without my conscious decision, producing that strange, repetitive tune. I stopped humming. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. That's when I remembered the walks I'd taken the past 2 afternoons. I hadn't really thought about where I was going. I'd just walked, letting my feet carry me along what felt like familiar paths. But they couldn't be familiar. I'd never been here before. Except now I was remembering the clearing, the fallen birch tree standing there in the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. I was remembering it like a memory, not like something I'd seen for the first time yesterday. I grabbed my phone, forgetting there was no signal. The screen lit up, 2:47 a.m. I looked at my photos, scrolling back to the past few days. There were pictures I didn't remember taking. The clearing, the birch tree. Multiple shots from slightly different angles, like I'd been documenting it. The timestamps showed I'd taken them yesterday afternoon and again today. I put the phone down carefully, like it might explode. My laptop was still open on the kitchen table where I'd left it. I walked over to it, my legs feeling distant and strange, like I was operating my body from far away. The document I'd been working on was still on screen, 3,000 new words added today. The most productive day I'd had in months. I started reading what I'd written. It was good, better than anything I'd managed in the past year. The prose flowed naturally, the characters felt alive. But as I read further, I began to notice something. The main character, the one I'd been struggling to develop for 8 months, had changed. She was making different choices than I'd planned. She was walking through a forest, humming a song she didn't recognize, feeling watched by something she couldn't see. She was describing this cabin, these woods, this exact experience. And at the end of the news section, she found a journal that described her life before she lived it. I closed the laptop. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control them. I needed to leave, right now. I could pack in 5 minutes, be in my car and driving away from here before sunrise. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to move, to run, to get out while I still could, but I couldn't make my feet move toward the bedroom, toward my suitcase. Instead, I found myself walking to the window, looking out at the dark forest. The trees were barely visible in the starlight, but I could make out the shape of them, the spaces between them. And I knew, without knowing how I knew, exactly which path through those trees would take me to the clearing. I wanted to go there. Even now, at 3 in the morning, I wanted to walk out into those woods and find that fallen birch tree. The urge was so strong it felt like someone else's desire imposed on my body. I forced myself away from the window. Back to the bedroom. I would pack. I would leave. This was insane. Whatever was happening here was wrong and impossible, and I needed to go. But when I reached for my suitcase, my hands stopped. I stood there, frozen, my fingers inches from the handle, unable to complete the motion. It was like hitting an invisible wall, something my mind couldn't push through. I tried again, and again. Each time my hand stopped just short of touching the suitcase, like my body was refusing the command. That's when I knew the journal entry was right. I couldn't leave. Something in this cabin, in these woods, had already woven itself into me. In the past 3 days, I'd walked the same paths, hummed the same song, made the same observations, lived the same pattern that had been lived before. And now, I was caught in it. I sat down on the bed, the journal still lying on the nightstand where I'd dropped it. I picked it up again, my hands steadier now, and turned to a blank page near the back. I found a pen in the drawer. I started writing. I didn't decide to write. My hands just moved, forming words I wasn't consciously choosing. She arrived at the cabin today, hoping the isolation would help her finish her book. She's been stuck for months. On her 3rd night, she'll find this journal. By then, it will already be too late. I wrote for 20 minutes, describing events that hadn't happened yet, using the past tense like they already had. I wrote about the 4th day, the 5th, the 6th. I wrote about trying to leave and failing. I wrote about the clearing and the birch tree and the song that wouldn't stop. When I finished, I looked at what I'd written. The handwriting was mine, but neater, more compact, just like the original entries in the journal. I'm still at the cabin. It's been 2 weeks now, though I've lost track of the exact count. I wake up every morning intending to leave, but I never do. I walk to the clearing every afternoon. I write in the journal every night, describing the next person who will come here, the next writer seeking solitude. I know exactly what they'll do because they'll do what I did, what the person before me did, what every person who stayed here has done since someone first carved this pattern into the woods. The owner still sends cheerful text messages asking if I'm enjoying my stay, though I never respond. My deadline has passed. My agent has stopped calling. None of it seems to matter anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I see them through the window, shadows of all the other writers who came here before me, walking the same paths, humming the same song. We're all still here in a way. The cabin remembers us. And now, we remember each other. I left the journal in the nightstand drawer this morning with one final entry added in fresh ink. For whoever comes next, they'll find it on their third night just like I did, and they'll already be humming the song. Story 2. Something knocked back. The knocking started on our first night, and by the third night it was answering us. Let me back up. This was supposed to be a fun weekend, me, my girlfriend Kayla, and our friends Blake and Morgan. We'd rented this cabin in the Poconos for cheap, like suspiciously cheap, but we figured it was just off-season rates. The place was old but maintained, tucked away on a private road with no other cabins visible through the trees. Perfect for a weekend of drinking, card games, and forgetting about our lives for a while. The owner wasn't there when we arrived, just a lockbox with a key and a binder of instructions on the kitchen counter. Standard stuff. How to work the heat, where the fuse box was, what to do about bears. But paperclipped to the inside front cover was a handwritten note, separate from the printed pages. Block letters written with a thick marker. House rule: do not knock on walls, floors, or ceilings. This is not a joke. Do not knock. We all laughed about it. Blake made some joke about a grumpy owner who hated noise complaints. Morgan suggested maybe the walls were thin and the owner lived nearby. Kayla thought maybe there was some superstition attached to the property, like knocking would bring bad luck or something. We kept joking about it through dinner, making exaggerated knocking gestures in the air, tiptoeing around like cartoon characters. It was funny. The whole thing seemed ridiculous. That first night, after a few drinks, we were playing cards at the kitchen table when Blake suddenly knocked his knuckles against the wall behind him. 3 sharp raps. He grinned at us, his eyes a little glassy from the beer. "Oops," he said. "Broke the sacred rule." We laughed. Morgan threw a poker chip at him. Kayla rolled her eyes and told him he was going to get us kicked out. I was about to deal the next hand when we all heard it. 3 knocks. From inside the wall Blake had just knocked on. Not an echo, these were distinct sounds, slightly muffled but clear. Knock, knock, knock. Same rhythm, same spacing as Blake's knocks, but coming from inside the wall. We all froze. Blake's smile faded. "That was just the pipes, right?" Morgan said. Her voice had gone quiet. "Old houses make weird sounds," Kayla added, but she was staring at the wall. Blake stood up and knocked again, more tentatively this time. 2 quick raps. We waited in silence. 5 seconds. 10. I was about to say something about how we were being paranoid when 2 knocks. Same location in the wall. Same muffled quality, like something was knocking from inside the space between the studs. "Okay, that's actually creepy," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Maybe there's an animal in the walls, raccoon or something?" Blake knocked again, 4 times fast. We all watched the wall, barely breathing. 4 knocks came back. Same speed, same rhythm. Exact echo of what Blake had just done. "Stop it," Kayla said sharply. "Blake, stop knocking." But he looked as unsettled as the rest of us. "It's probably just, I don't know, sound traveling weird in old walls. Acoustic thing." We tried to go back to the game, but the mood was broken. Morgan kept glancing at the wall. I found myself listening for any other sounds in the cabin, the creak of floorboards, the settling of the frame, anything that might explain what we'd heard. but the cabin was silent except for the wind outside. We called it an early night around 11. Blake and Morgan took the bedroom downstairs. Kayla and I took the loft. As we were climbing the stairs, Blake called up from below. "Hey, should we tell the owner about the knocking? Like, maybe there actually is an animal problem." "We can mention it when we check out," I said. "Let's just not knock on anything else tonight, okay?" Everyone agreed. We settled into bed and I almost managed to convince myself that we'd overreacted. Old cabins make strange sounds. There was probably a completely rational explanation that we'd laugh about in the morning. I was nearly asleep when I heard it again. 3 knocks, distant but clear, coming from somewhere below us. Then silence. Then 3 more knocks, from a different location. Then another set, from what sounded like the far side of the cabin. Kayla grabbed my arm. "Are you hearing that?" "Yeah," I whispered. The knocking continued, moving around the cabin, never the same location twice. Always 3 knocks, always the same rhythm. It sounded like someone or something was walking through the walls, knocking as it went. This went on for maybe 10 minutes before it finally stopped. Kayla and I lay awake for another hour, listening, but the cabin stayed quiet. When I finally fell asleep, I had strange, uneasy dreams about being trapped inside walls, hearing voices on the other side, but unable to reach them. The next morning, we all looked exhausted. Morgan said she and Blake had heard the knocking too. We tried to rationalize it over coffee. Animal in the walls, weird acoustics, settling foundation. But none of us really believed our explanations. Blake pulled up the listing on his phone and read through it again, looking for any mention of noise or structural issues. Nothing. The reviews were mostly positive, though several people mentioned the quirky house rules without elaborating. "Should we leave?" Morgan asked. "Like, just cut our losses and go home?" We debated it. In daylight, with coffee and breakfast, the whole thing seemed less terrifying. We'd paid for 2 nights, we were already here, and leaving felt like overreacting. We decided to stay, but agreed. Absolutely no knocking. We'd be quiet, respectful, and hopefully nothing else would happen. The day was fine. We hiked a nearby trail, drove into town for lunch, came back and played board games. By evening, the weirdness of the previous night had faded into something we could almost dismiss. Almost. We were careful. When we needed to get someone's attention, we called out or waved. We moved quietly, conscious of every sound we made. And for most of the evening, nothing happened. Around 10 p.m., we were watching a movie in the living room. Blake was on the couch, Morgan in the armchair. Kayla and I on the floor with our backs against the coffee table. About halfway through the movie, Blake shifted position and his elbow accidentally bumped the wall behind the couch. Not hard, just a soft thud. We all tensed, waiting. Nothing happened. We relaxed slightly. Then about 30 seconds later, something bumped back. Same spot on the wall, same soft thud. We paused the movie. The cabin was completely silent now. "Did you hear that?" Morgan whispered. We'd all heard it. Blake slowly stood up and backed away from the couch, staring at the wall like it might suddenly split open. That's when we heard the footsteps. Not in the walls this time. These sounded like they were coming from the crawl space beneath the cabin. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving from one side of the foundation to the other, right under where we were standing. "There's someone under the cabin," Kayla said, her voice tight with panic. "There's someone actually down there." I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, then headed for the door. Blake followed me. We went outside, circling the cabin, shining lights into the dark space beneath the floor. The cabin was built on a slight slope, raised on foundation posts with maybe 2 feet of clearance. We could see the dirt ground underneath, the wooden floor joists, pipes running along the space. We saw nothing else. No person, no animal, no explanation for what we'd heard. When we came back inside, Morgan was standing in the middle of the living room, her phone in her hand. "I tried calling the owner," she said. "It went straight to voicemail." We stood there, the four of us, trying to decide what to do. That's when Kayla spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Earlier, when we were watching the movie, I heard breathing. I thought it was one of you, but now I don't think it was." "What do you mean, breathing?" I asked. "Like someone breathing close by. Right near my ear, I felt air on my neck." We all moved to the center of the room, instinctively pulling away from the walls. The cabin suddenly felt much smaller, the walls too close. Blake cleared his throat. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to pack up our stuff, we're going to get in the car, and we're going to leave. Right now. I don't care that it's 10 at night, I don't care about losing money on the rental, we're leaving." Nobody argued. We split up to grab our things, Blake and Morgan heading downstairs, Kayla and I up to the loft. We were moving fast, shoving clothes into bags, not bothering to fold anything. I was zipping up my duffel when I heard Kayla make a small, frightened sound. She was standing at the top of the stairs, frozen. "Connor," she said quietly, "listen." From downstairs, we could hear Blake and Morgan talking, their voices low and urgent. But we could also hear something else. A third voice, just barely audible, speaking in the gaps between their words. It sounded like it was coming from the walls themselves. No specific location, just everywhere at once. And it was repeating what they were saying, not mocking them, not echoing them, saying the exact same words at the exact same time in a flat, monotone voice. "Oh God," Kayla breathed. "It's listening to us. It's been listening to us this whole time." We ran downstairs. Blake and Morgan were standing by the door, their bags already packed, both looking pale. They'd heard it too. We didn't talk as we headed for the door. We just moved, fast and silent, desperate to get outside, get to the car, get away from whatever was in that cabin with us. Blake reached for the doorknob. Before he could touch it, something knocked on the door from the outside. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. We all backed away. The knocking came again. 3 knocks, patient and measured. "There's no one out there," Morgan said. "We just came from outside. There's no one there." Blake looked through the window next to the door. I watched his face go white. "What?" I asked. "What do you see?" "Nothing," he whispered. "There's nothing there." But the knocking, 3 more knocks from the door. Then as we stood there paralyzed, the knocking started coming from everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath our feet. Knock, 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 knock. Dozens of knocks, hundreds maybe, all around us, above us, below us. Not random, synchronized. All following the same rhythm, the same pattern. The same 3 knocks Blake had made on that first night. We ran. Blake grabbed the door handle and yanked it open, and we burst out into the night, sprinting for the car. Behind us, the knocking continued, following us out of the cabin. I could hear it in the trees around us, in the ground beneath our feet, like the whole forest had learned the pattern and was repeating it back to us. We piled into the car, Blake fumbling with the keys. The knocking was on the car now, all around us, on the windows, the roof, the doors. 3 knocks, over and over, surrounding us. The engine started and Blake floored it, the car fishtailing on the gravel road as we accelerated away from the cabin. The knocking faded behind us as we drove, finally disappearing as we reached the main road. None of us spoke during the 2-hour drive home. What was there to say? We'd all experienced the same impossible thing. The owner tried to charge us for the full rental. I disputed it with my credit card company, explaining that we'd left early due to concerns about the property. I didn't mention the knocking. How could I? They asked if we documented the issue. I said no. The charge went through anyway. About a week later, Blake sent a screenshot to our group chat. He'd looked up the property records for the cabin. 30 years ago, A family had lived there year-round. One winter, during a bad storm, their 8-year-old daughter had gotten lost in the woods. Search parties found her 3 days later in the crawlspace beneath the cabin. She'd been trapped there, knocking on the floor to get her family's attention, but the storm had been too loud. By the time they found her, she'd died from exposure. I still hear it sometimes late at night when my apartment is quiet. 3 knocks, so faint I can almost convince myself I'm imagining them. Kayla says she hears it too in her new place across town. We don't knock on walls anymore, not for any reason, not ever, because we know now that something might knock back. Story 3. The caretaker who never left. I met Derek on my second morning at the cabin, and by the third night, I realized he'd been dead for 3 years. The cabin belonged to a friend of a friend, one of those hand-me-down deals where you get a key and a vague promise that everything works, mostly. I'd needed to get away from the city for a while. My life had been grinding me down. Job I hated, apartment I couldn't afford, relationship that had just imploded. When someone offered me a week at their family cabin in the Adirondacks for free, I jumped at it. The owner, a woman named Patricia, emailed me directions and details. The cabin was about an hour from the nearest town, down a series of progressively smaller roads that eventually turned from pavement to gravel to dirt. She mentioned that a caretaker checked on the property periodically and he might stop by during my stay. Derek knows the property better than anyone, her email said. If you have any issues, he can help. Very reliable, been taking care of the place for years. I arrived on a gray afternoon in late October. The cabin was larger than I'd expected, 2 stories. Cedar siding weathered to a soft silver, surrounded by tall pines that blocked most of the daylight. It had that particular smell old cabins have, like wood smoke and dust and time. The interior was dated but clean. Plaid furniture, knotty pine walls, a stone fireplace that dominated the main room. I spent the first day settling in, making a fire, trying to convince myself that the silence was peaceful rather than oppressive. The isolation was more intense than I'd anticipated. No cell signal, no Wi-Fi, no sounds except wind and the occasional creak of old wood settling. By evening, I was already feeling the edges of that particular loneliness that comes from being truly alone. The next morning, I woke to the sound of footsteps on the porch. Heavy boots, confident strides. I looked through the window and saw a man in his 50s standing by the woodpile inspecting the logs. He was wearing work clothes, faded jeans, a flannel jacket, boots caked with mud. He had that weathered look of someone who spent most of their time outdoors. I opened the door. He turned and smiled, friendly but reserved. "Morning," he said. "I'm Derek. Patricia mentioned she had someone staying this week. Just wanted to check in, make sure everything's working okay." "Oh yeah, everything's great so far. Thanks." He nodded, glancing around the porch with the assessing eye of someone who knew the place intimately. "Fire's working? You figured out the damper?" "Took me a minute, but yeah, got it going last night." "Good. Weather's supposed to turn cold tonight. You'll want to keep it fed." He gestured toward the woodpile. "I brought some extra logs up from the shed. Should be enough for the week." I hadn't heard him arrive. No car engine, no vehicle visible anywhere near the cabin. I figured maybe he'd parked down the road and walked up. We chatted for a few minutes. He gave me tips about the property, where the water shutoff was, which burner on the stove ran hot, how to jiggle the handle on the bathroom door if it stuck. He had that easy manner of someone completely comfortable in a space, moving around the porch and pointing to things with the casual authority of ownership. Before he left, he paused at the top of the porch steps. "You need anything at all? I'm around. Usually check on the place every few days." "I appreciate that. Thanks for stopping by." He nodded and walked off toward the tree line. I watched him go, then went back inside to make coffee. It wasn't until an hour later that I noticed his jacket, brown canvas worn at the elbows hanging on the hook by the door. I'd seen him wearing it. I was sure he'd been wearing it when he walked away. I opened the door and looked outside. No sign of him. No vehicle, no footprints visible on the dirt path leading away from the cabin. Just the jacket, hanging there like he'd never left. That was strange, but not alarming. Maybe he'd taken it off before leaving and I'd just not noticed. Maybe he had another jacket in his truck. I hung the jacket back up and tried not to think about it. That night, I saw him again. I was reading by the fire around 10 p.m. when I happened to glance toward the window. He was standing in the tree line maybe 30 yards from the cabin, just standing there. The moonlight was bright enough that I could make out his shape, his posture. He wasn't moving, just standing and looking at the cabin, looking at me. I felt a cold twist in my stomach. I stood up and walked to the window, and the moment I moved, he stepped back into the trees and disappeared. I stood there for a long time, staring out at the darkness, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe it hadn't been him. Maybe it was a tree stump or a shadow or my mind playing tricks in the poor light. But I knew what I'd seen. I checked all the doors and windows before bed, making sure everything was locked. The cabin felt different now, less like a refuge and more like something exposed, something being watched. I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing sounds, footsteps on the porch, the creak of floorboards, the soft scrape of something moving around the cabin's exterior. Every time I worked up the courage to look out the window, I saw nothing. But the sounds continued, circling the cabin, patient and methodical. In the morning, I found muddy boot prints on the porch. Large prints, the same tread pattern I'd seen on Derek's boots. They led from the steps to the door, then stopped, like someone had walked up to the door and just stood there. I tried to call Patricia, no signal. I'd known there wouldn't be, but I tried anyway, walking around the property holding my phone up, looking for even one bar. Nothing. The nearest landline was probably in town, an hour's drive away. I told myself I was overreacting. Derek was the caretaker. He was supposed to check on the place. Maybe he'd come by early this morning and I'd just not heard him. The fact that he'd been watching from the trees was weird, sure, but maybe he'd just been checking to see if the cabin lights were on, making sure I was okay. I spent the day trying to distract myself. I went for a walk, keeping the cabin in sight, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. When I got back, I noticed something that made my skin prickle. The jacket was gone. The brown canvas jacket that had been hanging by the door, gone. I searched the cabin. It wasn't on any of the hooks, not on the furniture, not in any of the closets. It had simply vanished. That evening, I was making dinner when I heard a vehicle approaching. I looked out to see a pickup truck pulling up. Newer model, clean, completely different from what I'd imagined Derek driving. A woman got out, maybe 40, wearing a professional jacket. She waved as she approached the porch. I opened the door before she could knock. "Hi," she said, smiling. "I'm Patricia. I was in the area and thought I'd stop by, see how you're settling in." "Patricia, the owner?" "That's me. Everything working out okay?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, mostly. Derek stopped by yesterday, very helpful." Her smile froze. The color drained from her face. "Derek?" she repeated softly. "Yeah, the caretaker. He checked on the fireplace, brought up some extra wood." She stared at me. What did he look like? I described him, the flannel jacket, the work boots, his age, his manner. With each detail, Patricia's expression became more strained. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she said very carefully, "Derek was my uncle. He took care of this property for 30 years. He knew every inch of this cabin." "Okay." "He died 3 years ago. Heart attack right there in the driveway." She pointed to a spot about 20 feet from where we were standing. We found him 2 days later. He'd been checking on the cabin like always. He was alone when it happened. I felt the world tilt slightly. That's not possible. I talked to him. He was right here, standing where you are now. Patricia's hands were shaking. I believe you. You're the third person to mention seeing him. The others, they described him exactly the same way you did. Same jacket, same boots. He always appears on the second day, and he always... She trailed off, looking past me into the cabin. Always what? I asked. He always takes something when he leaves. Something small. Personal. I thought about the jacket. My jacket, actually. I'd brought it with me. It had been hanging next to where I'd seen Derek's jacket on the hook. Now both were gone. We should go inside, Patricia said quietly. I need to check something. We went in. She walked through the cabin slowly, looking at things, touching surfaces. She stopped in front of the fireplace, staring at the mantel. He moved the photo, she said, pointing to a framed picture I'd barely noticed. An old photo of the cabin from decades ago. It used to be on the left side. He always liked it on the right. I hadn't moved it. I hadn't touched it. Patricia turned to me. You need to leave. Today. Right now. What? Why? Because Derek doesn't understand he's gone. He thinks he's still taking care of the place, and every time someone stays here, he gets more attached. More solid. The last person who stayed through a full week, Patricia stopped, then started again. She said he came inside, on the last night. She woke up and he was standing in her room just watching her sleep. She moved out the next morning and never came back. My mouth went dry. What does he want? I don't think he wants anything. I think he's just doing what he always did, checking on the cabin, making sure everyone's safe. But he doesn't realize he's terrifying people. He doesn't know he's dead. I started packing immediately. Patricia helped me carry things to the car, both of us moving quickly, not talking much. The sun was starting to set, shadows lengthening across the property. As I was loading the last bag into my trunk, I looked up at the cabin. Derek was standing in the upstairs window, the window to the bedroom I'd been sleeping in. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking around the room, his expression concerned, like he was searching for something. He's in the house, I whispered. Patricia followed my gaze. I saw her shoulders slump. He's checking on things. He always does a final walkthrough before dark. We stood there watching him move from window to window. At one point, he looked directly at us. He didn't wave or react. He just looked, then turned away and disappeared into the cabin's interior. I got in my car. Patricia leaned down to my window. I'm sorry, she said. I keep hoping he'll move on, find peace. But he loved this cabin. I don't think he knows how to leave it. Why do you keep renting it out? I asked. If you know he's there? She looked back at the cabin, her expression sad. Because it was his life's work, maintaining this place. And some part of me thinks, if people keep coming, if the cabin stays alive, maybe he can too. In whatever way he exists now. I drove away as fast as the dirt road would allow. In my rearview mirror, I could see the cabin receding into the trees. And I could see Derek standing on the porch now, watching me leave. He raised his hand. Not waving goodbye, just raising his hand. Like he was acknowledging my departure. Like a caretaker making note of a guest checking out. I made it to a motel in town that night. I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about Derek, still walking through that cabin. Still checking the fireplace, still bringing up wood from the shed. Still doing his job, faithful and diligent, not understanding that his job was over. Not understanding that he was over. I got a text from Patricia the next morning. She'd driven up to the cabin to check on things. The photo on the mantel had been moved back to the left side. My jacket was hanging on the hook by the door, neatly placed like it had been returned. And in the guest book on the kitchen table, there was a new entry. The handwriting was shaky but readable. Guest departed early, cabin secure, everything in order, we'll check again tomorrow. D. Patricia said she hasn't rented the cabin since. She can't bring herself to sell it, but she can't keep sending people to a place where her dead uncle is still working. Sometimes, she drives up there just to check on things. She says Derek is always there, always busy, always maintaining the property. She says he seems content. I think about him sometimes, walking those same paths, checking those same locks, living the same routine he followed for 30 years. Never resting, never leaving, still taking care of the place. Forever. Story 4. We were never alone in the cabin. The boot prints stopped at the foot of our bed, and that's when I knew we'd been sleeping next to something for 3 nights. My boyfriend Tyler and I had been looking for a quiet weekend getaway, something to reset after a brutal few months at work. When he mentioned his family had an old cabin in the Catskills that nobody used anymore, it seemed perfect. His grandfather had built it back in the 70s, and after his grandfather died, the family had mostly abandoned it. Tyler hadn't been there since he was a kid, but he still had a key. It's probably dusty as hell, he'd warned me, but it's free and it's ours for the weekend. We drove up on a Friday afternoon in early November. The cabin was smaller than I'd imagined from Tyler's childhood descriptions. 1 story, 2 bedrooms, a main room with a stone fireplace, kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. The property was overgrown, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to press in from all sides. The inside was exactly as dusty as advertised. Sheets covered the furniture, spiderwebs draped the corners, and there was that specific smell of a place that had been closed up too long. But it was structurally sound. The power still worked. And the water ran clear after a few minutes of sputtering. "See?" Tyler said, grinning as he pulled sheets off the furniture. "Told you it'd be fine. Little cleaning, it'll be perfect." We spent the afternoon making the place livable, sweeping, wiping down surfaces, airing out the rooms. By evening, with a fire going and candles lit, it actually felt cozy, romantic even. We made dinner, drank wine, talked about his memories of coming here as a kid. He pointed out where his grandfather used to sit, which bedroom had been his, where they'd hung the fish they caught. It was a good night. We went to bed early, exhausted from cleaning and the drive. The bedroom was small, just enough room for a queen bed and a dresser. Tyler had put fresh sheets on the bed that afternoon, and despite the cabin's age, everything felt clean and comfortable. I woke up around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. Halfway back to the bedroom, I froze. Tyler was snoring softly, but underneath that sound, I could hear something else. Breathing. Not his breathing, this was coming from somewhere else in the cabin, slow and deep and rhythmic. I stood in the hallway, barely breathing myself, trying to locate the source. It seemed to be coming from the locked basement door at the end of the hall. I stared at that door in the darkness, listening to that slow, steady breathing, telling myself it was just pipes or wind or old house sounds. I got back in bed and lay awake for a long time, listening. The breathing eventually stopped, or I convinced myself I'd imagined it. When I finally fell asleep, it was restless and uneasy. The next morning, I mentioned it to Tyler while he was making coffee. "I think I heard something weird last night, like breathing, coming from the basement." He laughed. "Probably the furnace. This place makes all kinds of sounds. I remember being scared of it as a kid." "Do you have a key to the basement?" "I don't think so. Grandpa always kept it locked. I'm not even sure why, probably just storage and old tools." I let it go. In daylight, with coffee and breakfast, it seemed like nothing. We spent the day hiking a nearby trail, driving into town for supplies, coming back to the cabin as the sun was setting. Everything felt normal, peaceful. That night, we stayed up late talking by the fire. Around midnight, Tyler went to get more wood from the pile on the porch. He was gone for maybe 2 minutes. When he came back in, he was frowning. "Did you move stuff around out there?" he asked. "What stuff?" "The firewood. It's been restacked, different from how I left it this afternoon." "I didn't touch it," he shrugged. "Weird. Maybe I'm misremembering." We went to bed shortly after. I fell asleep quickly, tired from the hiking. But again, around 3 a.m., I woke up. This time it was Tyler's voice that woke me. "Ashley," he was whispering. "Ashley, wake up." I opened my eyes. He was lying next to me, completely still, his eyes wide. "What's wrong?" I whispered back. "Listen." I listened. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps walking through the cabin. They were in the main room, moving around the furniture, pausing occasionally, then continuing. We could hear them through the closed bedroom door. My heart started pounding. Tyler slowly reached for his phone on the nightstand, moving carefully like any sudden motion might alert whoever was out there. He pulled up the emergency call screen, his thumb hovering over the button. The footsteps came down the hallway. Closer. Closer. They stopped right outside our bedroom door. We lay there frozen, staring at the door, waiting for the handle to turn. Tyler's hand was shaking, his phone screen casting a dim glow. The footsteps moved away, down the hall toward the bathroom, then back toward the main room. We heard what sounded like the front door opening and closing, though we hadn't heard it unlock. Tyler waited 5 minutes, then slowly got up. He grabbed a flashlight from his bag and opened our bedroom door as quietly as possible. I followed him, my whole body tense. We searched the cabin, every room, every closet. The front door was still locked from the inside, chain engaged. All the windows were closed and latched. We found nothing out of place, no sign anyone had been inside. "I heard that," Tyler said firmly. "We both heard that. Someone was walking around." "The door was locked," I said. "From the inside. How could someone have gotten in?" We checked the basement door. Still locked, no key. Tyler pulled on it, but it was solid. "Should we leave?" I asked. He looked torn. "And go where? It's 3 in the morning. Every hotel within an hour is probably full or closed." We decided to push the dresser in front of our bedroom door and try to wait it out until morning. Neither of us slept. We lay there in the darkness, listening to every sound, waiting for the footsteps to return. They didn't. The rest of the night was silent. When morning finally came, we were exhausted and rattled. Tyler wanted to leave immediately, but in daylight, the fear seemed disproportionate. We'd heard footsteps, sure, but found no evidence of anyone actually being there. It was an old cabin. Maybe the sounds carried strangely. Maybe we'd both been half asleep and confused. "One more night," Tyler said. "If anything else happens, we leave first thing. But I don't want to let paranoia ruin this weekend." I wasn't sure, but I agreed. We spent the day outside, avoiding the cabin as much as possible. We didn't talk much about the night before, but it hung between us, this shared experience we couldn't explain. That evening, we came back as the sun was setting. Tyler immediately noticed something. "The basement door," he said. I looked. The basement door was open. Not wide open, just slightly ajar, like someone had opened it and not quite closed it behind them. "We need to look down there," Tyler said. "Absolutely not. We need to leave. Right now." "Ashley, if someone is hiding in our basement, we need to know. We can't just drive away and leave them here in my family's cabin." I didn't want to go down there. Every instinct was screaming at me to get in the car and go. But Tyler was already moving toward the door, flashlight in hand. The basement stairs were steep and wooden, creaking under our weight. The air smelled damp and old, like earth and mildew. Tyler's flashlight swept across concrete walls, exposed beams, boxes stacked in corners. It was a typical basement. Cluttered, dusty, full of forgotten items, old furniture, paint cans, tools, boxes of who knows what. Nothing immediately alarming. Then Tyler's flashlight caught something in the far corner. A sleeping bag, spread out on the floor like someone had been lying on it recently. Next to it was a backpack and a pile of food wrappers, granola bar packages, empty water bottles, a banana peel that still looked fresh. "Oh my God," I whispered. Tyler moved closer, shining his light around the area. There were other signs, a few books stacked neatly, a battery-powered lantern, a bucket in the corner that I realized with horror was being used as a makeshift toilet. Someone had been living down here for days, maybe weeks. "Tyler," I said, my voice shaking. "Tyler, we need to leave right now." But he was staring at something else, a notebook lying open on top of the sleeping bag. He picked it up and started reading, his face going pale. "What does it say?" I asked. He didn't answer, just handed me the notebook. I read the open page by the light of his flashlight. The handwriting was cramped and hurried. They came back. The grandson, I think, and a girl. "They don't know I'm here. I've been so careful. Staying quiet during the day, only moving around at night when they're asleep. I just need a few more weeks. It's getting cold. I can't leave yet. They'll leave soon, they always do. Then I'll have the place to myself again." There were other entries going back weeks, describing the cabin, the property, the woods, describing how he'd found a way in through a broken window in the basement, how he'd been sleeping here, how he'd learned the family never came anymore. Then more recent entries. "Heard voices today. Someone's here. I'll have to be more careful. I'll wait until they sleep. Watched them through the bedroom window tonight. They don't check the locks. I could go in any time. Moved their firewood while they were gone today, just to see if they'd notice. They noticed. I need to be more subtle." The last entry was dated yesterday. "Went upstairs last night while they were sleeping. Stood in their room. She almost woke up. I could see her eyes moving under her eyelids. It's exciting, being this close. I wonder how long I can stand there before one of them really wakes up. I felt like I was going to be sick." Tyler grabbed my arm. "We're leaving. Now." We ran up the basement stairs, through the cabin, not bothering to grab our things, just our keys, our phones, straight to the car. Tyler was fumbling with the keys when I looked back at the cabin. There was someone in the window. The bedroom window. Standing where Tyler and I had been sleeping. A figure backlit by the setting sun watching us leave. I screamed. Tyler saw him too. He finally got the car started and we tore out of there, the car bouncing on the rutted driveway. We drove straight to the police station in the nearest town. They took our statement, sent officers to the cabin. They found the basement setup, the sleeping bag, the backpack, the notebook. But they didn't find the person. He'd vanished into the woods. The police told us this wasn't uncommon. People looking for shelter sometimes broke into vacation properties, especially in winter. Usually they fled when owners showed up. This person was more bold, more willing to stay. They found other things in the basement, photos printed from a computer, photos of the cabin, of the property. And photos of Tyler and me, taken through the windows, dozens of them. Us cooking dinner, us sitting by the fire, us sleeping. The police estimated he'd been living there for at least 3 weeks, and he'd been watching us from the moment we arrived. They never caught him. Tyler sold the cabin through a real estate agent. He couldn't bring himself to go back. The new owners renovated it completely, changing the locks, sealing up the basement, adding security. But I still think about those 3 nights. How we slept, believing we were alone. How we moved through that cabin thinking it was ours. How many times he must have been in our room standing there in the darkness watching us breathe. The police said the boot prints they found told the story. Muddy prints through the cabin coming up from the basement through the hallways into our bedroom. They stopped at the foot of our bed where he'd stood multiple times, multiple nights. I can't sleep with my bedroom door open anymore. I can't stay in isolated places. Tyler and I broke up 6 months later. Being together reminded us both of what happened, and neither of us could move past it. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear breathing that isn't mine. Convinced someone is standing in my room just outside my field of vision. I'll turn on every light, check every lock, look in every closet, but the fear never really goes away. Because now I know how easy it is. How someone can slip into your life, into your space, and you'll never know. How you can spend 3 nights sleeping next to something in the dark and never realize you were never alone. Story 5. The previous guest left a warning. I found the note on my first morning and I threw it away thinking it was a prank. By the 3rd night, I understood why they never checked out. The cabin rental was last minute. I'd needed somewhere to clear my head after a horrible month at work, and this place had good reviews and a cancellation opening. It was in Washington State, deep in the Cascades, advertised as rustic but comfortable with complete solitude. That sounded perfect. I arrived late on a Friday evening, let myself in with the key code, and did a quick walkthrough. The cabin was nicer than expected. Clean, well-maintained, with big windows overlooking the forest. The owner had left a welcome basket with local coffee, granola bars, and a handwritten note with Wi-Fi password and emergency contact info. I unpacked, made dinner, went to bed early. The drive had been exhausting, and I was looking forward to a weekend of sleeping in and doing absolutely nothing. The next morning, I was making coffee when I noticed a piece of paper sticking out from inside the coffee maker. I pulled it out, figuring it was instructions or maybe a filter brand recommendation. It was a handwritten note, written in frantic, uneven script on a torn piece of notebook paper. Don't sleep in the master bedroom, don't open the cellar door, leave before the 3rd night. This isn't a joke. I'm leaving this note because I can't leave myself. Please, get out. I stared at it for a long moment, then laughed. It had to be a prank, right? Some previous guest trying to spook the next person. The reviews hadn't mentioned anything weird. The owner seemed totally normal in her messages. This was just someone messing around. I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. Then I made my coffee and sat by the window, enjoying the view. The master bedroom was the only bedroom. Where else was I supposed to sleep? And I hadn't seen a cellar door anywhere. Just a regular basement door in the hallway, unlocked and ordinary. The whole thing was ridiculous. I spent the day hiking nearby trails, drove into the small town about 20 minutes away for supplies, came back in the afternoon. The cabin was exactly as I'd left it. Peaceful, normal. That evening I made dinner and ate on the porch, watching the sunset through the trees. Around 9 p.m. I headed inside to read before bed. I was walking past the hallway when I noticed something. The basement door was closed. I distinctly remembered it being open that morning. I'd glanced down the stairs while doing my initial walkthrough, but now it was closed. I stood there looking at it, remembering the note. Don't open the cellar door. I opened it, because of course I did. I wasn't going to let a stupid prank note make me scared of a basement. It was just a basement. Concrete floor, wooden stairs, boxes, and storage stuff visible in the dim light. Nothing unusual. I flipped the light switch and a bare bulb illuminated the space below. Totally ordinary basement. I closed the door and went to bed, feeling foolish for even checking. I woke up around 2 a.m., not sure why. The cabin was completely silent, that deep quiet you only get in isolated places. I lay there listening to nothing, about to drift back to sleep when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate, coming up the basement stairs. I sat up in bed, my heart suddenly pounding. The footsteps were clear, distinct. Someone walking up wooden stairs, each step creaking. They reached the top of the stairs, then stopped. I waited, barely breathing. Nothing else. No door opening, no more footsteps, just silence. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, then slowly got out of bed. I crept to the bedroom doorway and looked down the hall. The basement door was open again. Wide open, the darkness beyond it absolute. I stood there for a long time, shining my light down the hallway, illuminating that open door. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Eventually, I forced myself to walk down the hall. I shone my light down the basement stairs. Empty. I pulled the door closed and went back to bed, leaving my phone's flashlight on, setting it on the nightstand. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, exhausted and unnerved, I considered leaving. But it was already Saturday and I'd only planned to stay until Sunday. One more night. I could handle one more night and then I'd leave first thing in the morning. I went to the kitchen to make coffee, trying to shake off the fear. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The note. The crumpled note I'd thrown in the trash yesterday. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, smoothed out flat like someone had carefully unfolded it and placed it there. Next to it was a pen. And below the original message, in different handwriting, messier, shakier, someone had added, "She didn't listen either. Second night. It comes to the bedroom door on the second night." I picked up the note with trembling hands. The ink looked fresh. This had been written recently. Maybe last night, maybe while I was sleeping. I ran through the cabin, checking every room, every closet. I was alone. But someone had been here. Someone had gone through my trash, found the note, added to it, and left it for me to find. I called the owner. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. I sent a text. "Need to talk to you immediately. Something's wrong with the cabin." No response. I looked up the reviews again on my phone. All positive, all normal. 5 stars, glowing descriptions, no mention of anything weird. But then I noticed something I'd missed before. The most recent review was from 3 months ago, and before that, there was a gap. No reviews for almost a year. I searched for news about the property, the area, anything, and I found it. An article from 18 months ago, small piece in a regional paper, "Woman missing after cabin rental." A guest named Lauren had rented this cabin for a week and never checked out. Her car was found at the property, all her belongings still inside, but she'd vanished. Search parties found nothing. The case was still open, but there were no leads. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I needed to leave. Right now. I didn't care that it was only Saturday, didn't care about losing money on the rental. I started throwing things into my bag. That's when I heard it again. The footsteps on the basement stairs, in the middle of the day with sunlight streaming through the windows, clear as anything. Step. 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 Reaching the top, the basement door, which I'd closed and wedged shut with a chair that morning, swung slowly open. I ran to the front door, grabbed the handle. It wouldn't turn. I tried again, putting my full weight into it, twisting and pulling. The door wouldn't open. I ran to the back door. Same thing. Locked somehow, though there was no lock mechanism visible. I tried the windows. They wouldn't budge, like they'd been nailed shut, though I could see no nails. I was trapped. I stood in the living room, bag in hand, trying not to panic. This was impossible. Doors don't just lock themselves. There had to be an explanation. A mechanism I didn't understand. Something. The footsteps were in the hallway now. Slow, patient. Coming toward the living room where I stood, I couldn't see anyone, but I could hear them clear as day. each footfall distinct, moving through the cabin like they knew exactly where they were going. They stopped at the edge of the living room, right at the boundary between the hallway and the main space. I stared at the empty air where the sounds had stopped, my whole body shaking. Then I heard breathing, slow, deep, right in front of me. Something was standing there. I couldn't see it, but it was there. I could feel it, the way you can feel someone staring at you. The air felt thick, heavy, wrong. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off the space where the breathing was coming from. I backed into the kitchen, then into the corner, pressing myself against the cabinets. The breathing moved, following me. It stopped about 3 feet away. And then I felt it. Fingers. Cold, solid fingers touching my arm. I screamed and bolted. I ran to the master bedroom, slammed the door, shoved the dresser in front of it. I could hear the footsteps following, stopping outside the door. The handle rattled, once, twice, then stopped. I sat on the floor, back against the dresser, watching that door. Hours passed. Daylight faded. Night came. The handle never rattled again, but I could hear breathing on the other side of the door. Constant. Patient. I remembered the note. Don't sleep in the master bedroom. I was trapped in the master bedroom, and it was the 3rd night. Around midnight, the door started to open, not violently, slowly, gently, pushing against the dresser. I threw my weight against the dresser, but it kept sliding, inch by inch, like something impossibly strong was pushing from the other side. I didn't make it to morning. I don't remember what happened after the door opened fully. My memory cuts out there like someone took scissors to the film of my experience and removed everything after that moment. The next thing I remember is waking up in my car in a hospital parking lot 3 days later. I was parked at a hospital 50 miles from the cabin. My clothes were dirty, my bag was in the back seat, my phone was dead. The hospital staff said I'd walked in at 4 a.m., confused and unable to tell them where I'd been. I had bruises on my arms, dirt under my fingernails, scratches on my legs. No serious injuries, but I was severely dehydrated and appeared to be in shock. I couldn't tell them anything. I still can't. Those 3 days are just gone. The police went to the cabin. Everything appeared normal. My rental period had ended. The owner said she'd tried to contact me when I didn't check out on time, but I hadn't responded. She said everything in the cabin was fine, no signs of disturbance. They found my note, the one I'd crumpled, the one with the added message. It was in the trash where I'd originally thrown it. The additional handwriting was gone. Just the original warning remained in one person's handwriting. The police thought I'd had some kind of mental health crisis, maybe a reaction to stress or medication. They were kind but clearly skeptical of my story. I tried to piece together what happened. I looked up Lauren, the woman who'd disappeared. I found her sister on social media and sent a message. She responded and we talked on the phone. Lauren had left a voicemail for her sister on her 3rd night at the cabin. The sister played it for me. Lauren's voice was terrified, barely coherent, saying something was in the cabin with her, that she couldn't get out, that she shouldn't have stayed in the master bedroom. The voicemail cut off mid-sentence. Lauren was never seen again. Her sister said the police had found a note in the cabin hidden inside a book, a warning written by a previous guest telling people not to sleep in the master bedroom, not to open the cellar door, to leave before the 3rd night. The exact same warning I'd found. The cabin is still available for rent. The listing is still active. The owner still responds to inquiries with friendly, helpful messages. The reviews are still positive, all 5 stars. But if you look carefully at the dates, you'll notice the gaps. Periods where there are no reviews, sometimes for months at a time. Those are the guests who didn't leave before the 3rd night. I tried to warn people. I tried to report the property, to leave reviews, to contact authorities. But my reviews get deleted. My reports go nowhere. The owner threatens legal action for defamation, so I'm telling you now. If you ever see a cabin rental in the Cascades, rustic but comfortable, promising complete solitude, check the reviews carefully. Look for the gaps. Look for the warnings between the lines. And if you find a note telling you to leave, please listen. Leave before the third night. I can't sleep in bedrooms anymore. I sleep on couches, on floors, anywhere but a bedroom. Because sometimes late at night I wake up and I can hear it. That breathing, those footsteps. And I know that whatever I encountered in that cabin, whatever took those 3 days from me, it's not done. It followed me home. And I think eventually it's going to finish what it started. Story 6. Someone was living in the crawl space. The cabin smelled wrong from the moment I arrived, and it took me 3 days to understand why. Someone had been breathing my air the whole time. I'd booked the place for a week in February, needing distance from everything. The cabin was in rural Oregon, miles from the nearest town, advertised as a writer's retreat. Perfect isolation, complete silence, nothing but forest and solitude. After a brutal breakup and losing my job in the same month, I needed to not exist for a while. The owner, a man named Gary, met me there to hand over the keys. He seemed normal enough, 50s, flannel shirt, friendly but reserved. He showed me around quickly, pointing out the wood stove, the generator backup, the well water system, basic cabin stuff. "You'll have the place completely to yourself," he said. "Nearest neighbor is about 4 miles. If you need anything, call the number on the fridge." He left, and I was alone. Finally, blessedly alone. The smell hit me that first night. It wasn't obvious at first, just this faint, stale quality to the air, like the cabin had been closed up too long. I opened windows, aired the place out, figured it would dissipate. It didn't. If anything, it got stronger. Lived in, that's what it reminded me of. That specific smell of occupancy, of someone's presence in a space. Like when you walk into a room after someone's been sleeping there, body odor, breath, the subtle markers of human occupation. I tried to ignore it. I'd come here for silence and solitude, not to obsess over smells. I spent the first day settling in, the second day trying to write, failing, taking long walks through the snow-dusted forest. By the third day, I'd fallen into a rhythm. Coffee in the morning, writing attempts, walks, reading by the wood stove at night. That's when I noticed the food. I'd bought groceries on my way to the cabin, enough for a week, carefully planned. I'm particular about portions, about tracking what I eat. On the third morning, I went to make breakfast and realized 2 granola bars were missing from the box I'd opened the day before. I'd eaten one. I was sure I'd eaten only one. But 3 were gone now. I stared at the box, trying to remember. Had I eaten 2 and forgotten? Had I miscounted? It seemed unlikely, but I'd been distracted, stressed. Maybe I'd just not been paying attention. That afternoon, I took a long walk. When I got back cold and hungry, I went to heat up the leftover pasta I'd made the night before. The container was in the fridge where I'd left it, but there was less pasta, noticeably less. I stood there with the refrigerator door open, looking at that container, my skin prickling. I know how much I'd eaten for dinner. I know how much should have been left over. Someone had eaten some of it. Someone had opened my fridge, taken my food. I searched the cabin, every room, every closet. I checked the doors and windows, all locked from the inside. I was alone, but the food was missing. That was undeniable. I called Gary. "Is there any way someone else has access to the cabin? A cleaner or maintenance person?" "No," he said, sounding confused. "You're the only one with the code." "Why?" "I think some of my food has been eaten." A pause. "Are you sure? Sometimes portions can be hard to judge." "I'm sure." Well, I can come check it out if you want, but it'll be tomorrow morning at the earliest. I'm 2 hours away. I told him I'd let him know, hung up and sat on the couch trying to think rationally. Food doesn't disappear. If it was gone, there was an explanation. Either I'd eaten more than I thought, or someone else was in the cabin. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing sounds, creaks, subtle movements, the sense of the cabin settling. Old buildings make noise, I kept telling myself. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the sounds were too rhythmic, too purposeful, like footsteps, careful and soft. Around 3 a.m., I heard something that made me sit up in bed, fully awake. Scratching. Faint but distinct, coming from below me, from under the floorboards. I got up and pressed my ear to the floor. The scratching continued, irregular, like something moving around in a confined space. Then it stopped. Silence for maybe 30 seconds. Then it started again, in a different location. Something was under the cabin, in the crawl space. I didn't go back to sleep. I sat on the couch with all the lights on until sunrise, listening to occasional scratching sounds that seemed to move around beneath the floor, never staying in one place for long. In the morning, I went outside to look. The cabin was built on a foundation that created about 2 feet of crawl space underneath. I walked around the perimeter looking for any access point. On the far side, away from the driveway, I found it, a small access panel about 2 feet square, designed to let maintenance workers into the crawl space. The panel was slightly ajar. I crouched down, my heart hammering, and pulled it open fully. The opening was small, but a person could fit through it if they squeezed. Beyond it was darkness, the underside of the cabin barely visible. I should have called the police right then, but part of me was still trying to rationalize this. Maybe an animal had gotten under there. Raccoon, opossum, something that could explain the scratching. I got my flashlight and shone it into the crawl space. I saw the sleeping bag first. Army green, rolled out on the dirt floor about 10 feet in. Next to it, a battery-powered lantern, a backpack. Food wrappers scattered around, water bottles, a bucket in the corner that I didn't want to think about. Someone had been living under the cabin, under me. While I walked above them, while I slept, someone had been down there in the dark, listening to every step I took. I backed away from the access panel so fast I fell, landing hard in the snow. I scrambled to my feet and ran inside, locking the door, grabbing my phone. I called 911. The dispatcher said they'd send someone, but it would be at least 40 minutes. I was in a remote area, far from the nearest station. She told me to stay inside, keep the doors locked, stay on the line if I felt unsafe. I didn't stay on the line. I called Gary instead. "There's someone living in the crawl space," I said, my voice shaking. "Under the cabin, their stuff is down there. They've been there the whole time." He was silent for a long moment. "That's impossible. That access panel is locked." "It's not locked. It's open. I saw everything. Sleeping bag, food, all of it." "I'm calling the police," he said. "I already did." "Gary, have there been other guests who complained about anything? Missing food? Strange sounds?" Another pause. "There was a woman last month. She left after 2 days, said she felt uncomfortable, like someone was watching her. But we checked the property. We didn't find anything." "Because you didn't check the crawl space," I thought, but didn't say. I waited inside, watching the access panel through the window, terrified that someone would emerge from it. But nothing moved. 45 minutes later, a sheriff's deputy arrived. I explained everything, showed him the crawl space access. He shone his flashlight into the space. The sleeping bag was gone. The backpack was gone. The lantern, the food wrappers, the water bottles, all gone. Just empty dirt floor and the support beams of the cabin above. "You said there was stuff here?" the deputy asked. It was here an hour ago, I swear. Someone moved it. He crawled partially into the crawl space, looking around with his flashlight. When he emerged, his expression was skeptical but not unkind. Ma'am, there's no evidence anyone was under here recently. No compressed dirt where a sleeping bag would have been, no trash, nothing. They cleaned it up. Whoever was here, they cleaned up when they heard me calling. He nodded slowly. It's possible, but without evidence, there's not much we can do. I can file a report. You should probably not stay here just to be safe. Gary arrived 30 minutes later. He was apologetic, concerned, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. The deputy's skepticism had colored his perception. He offered me a full refund, helped me pack my car. As I was loading the last bag, Gary went around the property one more time, checking locks, looking for any sign of intrusion. He came back holding something. I found this, he said, handing it to me. It was wedged between the foundation stones near the access panel. It was a photograph, wrinkled and dirty like it had been handled a lot. The photograph showed the interior of the cabin, my cabin, taken from a low angle, like someone had been lying on the floor, shooting upward. In the photograph, you could see furniture, the ceiling, the window, and in the window's reflection, barely visible, the blurry image of a person sleeping on the couch. Me, sleeping on the couch. The photo had been taken from inside the cabin, from floor level, from the perspective of someone lying flat, possibly in a position where they could see up through gaps in the floorboards. We need to call the police back, Gary said quietly. They came back. They searched the crawl space more thoroughly, pulling themselves all the way through. This time they found things. Scratches in the dirt showing something had been dragged through recently. A cigarette butt wedged against a support beam. And most disturbing, small holes drilled through the floorboards in several locations. Holes positioned under key areas: the bed, the couch, the shower. Someone had been watching me through the floor for days. The police put out an alert. Gary closed the cabin to rentals. I drove home that day 4 days earlier than planned, and I couldn't stop shaking the entire drive. They never found who it was. The cigarette butt didn't match any DNA in the system. The photograph had no fingerprints except mine and Gary's. Whoever had been living under that cabin had vanished completely, taking all their possessions with them. But I think about them constantly. How long had they been there before I arrived? Had they been there during previous guests' stays? How many people had slept in that cabin unaware that someone was beneath them, watching through drilled holes in the floor, listening to every sound they made? And the worst thought, the one that wakes me up at night, they'd been eating my food. Which meant they hadn't just been under the cabin. They'd been inside while I was sleeping or out on walks. They'd opened my refrigerator, eaten my pasta, taken my granola bars. They'd moved through the cabin while I was unconscious, inches from where I lay sleeping. I couldn't stay in my apartment after I got back. The thought of someone beneath me, above me, behind walls, watching through hidden gaps, it became unbearable. I moved in with a friend temporarily, then found a new place on the top floor of a building. Solid concrete. No crawl space, no attic access. But I still hear the scratching sometimes, late at night when the building is quiet. I know it's not real, just my mind playing tricks. But I hear it, and I remember that smell, that lived-in quality to the air in the cabin. The smell of someone else breathing in your space, sharing your air, existing invisibly alongside you. The police told me I was lucky. Whoever had been under that cabin could have hurt me at any time. They'd had access, opportunity, complete advantage, but they hadn't. They'd just watched, waited. Existed in parallel to me, separated only by a few inches of wood. I don't feel lucky. I feel like I'll never be alone again, not really, because now I know how easy it is for someone to hide, how little space they actually need, how silently they can exist right beneath your feet while you live your life completely unaware. Gary renovated the cabin after that, sealed the crawl space, removed the access panel, even reinforced the floor. He sent me an email months later saying the place was booked solid, the incident forgotten by new renters who never knew what happened. But I wonder sometimes if they're really gone, if they found another cabin, another crawl space, another person to watch through holes in the floor, or if they just learned to hide better. I still have the photograph. I don't know why I kept it. Sometimes I look at it, at myself sleeping, unaware, vulnerable, at the blurry figure barely visible in the window's reflection, the photographer invisible except for that faint ghost in the glass. And I remember, I was never alone in that cabin. From the moment I arrived, someone was there, under me, watching me, breathing my air, living their secret life in the space I thought was mine. Story 7. The cabin took pictures of me while I slept. My photo gallery had new pictures that I didn't take, and by the time I understood what they meant, it was almost too late to leave. The cabin was in northern Maine, about as isolated as you can get without actually going off the grid. I'd found it through one of those boutique rental apps that cater to people who want to disconnect and recharge. No Wi-Fi, limited cell service, on just you and the wilderness. After 6 months of non-stop deadlines and city noise, that sounded like paradise. I'm a photographer by trade. Commercial work mostly, nothing artistic or meaningful anymore. I'd been feeling burned out, creatively empty, and I thought maybe a week alone in the woods would help me remember why I'd fallen in love with photography in the first place. The irony of what happened isn't lost on me. The cabin was small but comfortable. 1 bedroom, main living area with a wood stove, tiny kitchen, big windows overlooking a frozen lake. The owner had left detailed instructions for everything: heat, water, where to find supplies. She'd also left a note saying cell service was non-existent, but there was a landline for emergencies. I settled in that first night, made dinner, tried to read. Without internet or phone service, the silence was absolute and strange. I'd brought my camera gear but hadn't unpacked it yet. I was too tired, too fried. I just wanted to sleep. I did sleep, better than I had in months. I woke up naturally around 8 a.m. feeling more rested than I'd felt in years. I made coffee, sat by the window watching the morning light on the snow, and finally felt like maybe I could breathe again. Out of habit, I checked my phone. No service as expected, but I'd been taking photos on my drive up. The landscape, interesting trees, light through clouds. So I opened my gallery to review them. There were photos I didn't remember taking, a lot of them. The thumbnails at the bottom of my gallery showed my driving shots, then a jump to a series of new images. I tapped on the first one. It was a photo of the cabin's bedroom, taken from the doorway looking in. The lights were off, but the image was surprisingly clear, illuminated by moonlight or some other ambient source. The bed was visible, and on it a person sleeping. Me. I stared at the photo. The timestamp said it had been taken at 2:14 a.m. last night while I was sleeping. My hands started shaking. I scrolled to the next photo. Same bedroom, same sleeping figure, but taken from a slightly different angle. Like the camera had moved closer. Timestamp, 2:27 a.m. Another photo, closer still. The camera was now inside the room, maybe 5 feet from the bed. I could see my face in this one, peaceful and unconscious. Timestamp, 2:45 a.m. I felt sick. I scrolled through more photos, my heart pounding harder with each image. They were all from last night, all showing me sleeping, taken at different times and from progressively closer positions. The last photo in the sequence was timestamped 3:51 a.m. In it, the camera was right next to the bed, angled down at my sleeping face. close enough that you could see individual eyelashes, the texture of my skin, the way my mouth was slightly open. Someone had been in the bedroom with me last night. Someone had taken my phone and photographed me sleeping for almost 2 hours, moving around the room, getting closer and closer before putting the phone back on the nightstand where I'd left it. I checked every door and window, all locked from the inside. I searched the entire cabin, closets, under the bed, anywhere someone could hide. Nothing. I grabbed the landline and dialed the owner's number from the instruction sheet. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I left a frantic message. There are photos on my phone. Someone was in the cabin last night. I need you to call me back immediately. I sat on the couch, my phone in my lap, staring at those photos, trying to make sense of them. The cabin had been locked. I was alone. So how had someone taken these pictures? I waited 2 hours for the owner to call back. She didn't. I tried calling again, same result. The isolation that had seemed appealing yesterday now felt suffocating and dangerous. I decided to leave. I'd pack up, get in my car, drive until I had cell service, and figure this out from somewhere safe. I went to the bedroom to get my suitcase. That's when I noticed the camera. My professional camera, the one I'd brought but not unpacked, was sitting on the dresser. I'd left it in my bag. I was certain I'd left it in my bag, but now it was out, sitting on the dresser, the lens cap removed. I picked it up with trembling hands and turned it on. The battery was half drained. It had been fully charged yesterday. I opened the photo review. More pictures of me sleeping, dozens of them. These were higher quality than the phone photos, shot with my good lens perfectly exposed and focused. The timestamps went back further, starting around midnight, continuing through the night. Different angles, different zoom levels. Some were wide shots showing the whole room. Others were extreme close-ups of my face, my hands, my hair spread across the pillow. The last photo, time-stamped 6:47 a.m., was taken from the bedroom doorway. It showed the bed empty now and the bathroom door ajar. I was in the shower at 6:47 this morning. Someone had been taking pictures of me right up until I woke up and got out of bed. I dropped the camera. My whole body was shaking now, adrenaline and terror making it hard to think straight. I grabbed my things and ran to my car, not bothering to pack properly, just throwing bags in the trunk. The car wouldn't start. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch. I tried again and again, pumping the gas, willing it to start. Nothing. I sat there in the driver's seat, breathing hard, trying not to panic. I knew cars, knew basic mechanics. I popped the hood and got out to look. The battery cables had been disconnected. Deliberately, neatly disconnected and tucked to the side so they weren't touching the terminals. Someone didn't want me to leave. I reconnected the cables with shaking hands, got back in the car. This time it started. I threw it in reverse and accelerated hard down the driveway, my tires spitting snow and gravel. I made it about a quarter mile before I had to stop. A tree was blocking the road. A large pine, recently fallen, lying directly across the narrow drive. There was no way around it. Dense forest on both sides. It hadn't been there when I drove in yesterday, and this tree didn't look naturally fallen. The trunk was cut, the sawdust still fresh on the stump. Someone had cut down a tree to trap me here. I sat in the car staring at that fallen tree and felt true terror for the first time in my life. This wasn't random, this was planned. Someone had been in the cabin, had taken those photos, had disabled my car, had blocked my exit. And they'd done it all while I slept, moving around me in the dark, completely silent. I put the car in park and pulled out my phone. Still no service, but I opened the photos again, forcing myself to look at them more carefully. In several of the images, there were reflections visible. In the window glass, in the mirror above the dresser. Faint reflections of the person holding the camera. I zoomed in on one of the clearer reflections. The figure was hard to make out, but I could see enough to know it wasn't a person. Or at least, not a normal person. The proportions were wrong. The shape too tall and thin. The head too large. It looked distorted, like something wearing a person's shape but not quite getting it right. I switched to the photos on my professional camera, checking the metadata. Every photo had GPS coordinates embedded. I opened the map app and plotted them. The coordinates put the camera in different locations around the property, but several photos were tagged with coordinates that made no sense. They placed the camera above the cabin. Some were 30 feet up. Some were directly above the bed, like the photos had been taken from the ceiling or from the air. I looked up through the car windshield at the cabin. In daylight, it looked completely ordinary. But I thought about those photos, those impossible angles, that distorted reflection. My phone buzzed. A notification. My gallery had new photos. With hands that wouldn't stop shaking, I opened it. 5 new images time-stamped from the last 10 minutes. They showed me in the car, sitting in the driver's seat looking at my phone. The photos were taken from outside the car, through the window, from multiple angles. Someone was photographing me right now. I looked around frantically. The forest was dense, but I couldn't see anyone. No movement, no figure watching. Just trees and snow and silence. Another photo appeared in my gallery. This one showed me looking around, my face pressed close to the car window, eyes wide with fear. The angle suggested it had been taken from directly in front of the car, maybe 10 feet away. There was nothing 10 feet in front of my car, just empty road. I put the car in gear and accelerated forward, straight at where the photographer should be. The car passed through empty air. I stopped, breathing hard, and checked my phone again. 3 more photos, me driving forward, taken from beside the car, keeping pace as I moved. I couldn't see who or what was taking the pictures, but it was there, right next to me. Invisible but present, documenting everything I did. I thought about the reflection in the cabin photos. That wrong shape, too tall, too thin. I thought about the photos taken from the ceiling from impossible angles. I thought about the tree cut down while I slept, the battery cables disconnected without a sound, someone moving through the locked cabin, invisible and silent. This wasn't a person. I didn't know what it was, but it wasn't human. My gallery updated again. A new photo, time-stamped seconds ago. It was taken from the back seat of my car, shooting forward. The photo showed the back of my head, my hands on the steering wheel, the windshield beyond. It was inside the car with me. I screamed and threw the door open, falling out into the snow. I scrambled away from the car on my hands and knees, then ran. I didn't have a plan, didn't know where I was going. I just ran into the forest, away from the car, away from the cabin, crashing through undergrowth and snow. My phone kept buzzing in my pocket. New photos, new photos, new photos. I pulled it out as I ran, looking at the screen. They were all of me running, from different angles, beside me, behind me, ahead of me, keeping pace no matter how fast I moved. Each photo perfectly composed, perfectly exposed, like a professional was shooting them. I stopped running, chest heaving, and screamed at the empty forest. "What do you want?" My phone buzzed. 1 new photo. I looked at the screen. The photo showed me from about 6 feet away, standing in the forest, my face red and tear-stained, my mouth open mid-scream. But in this photo, there was something visible in the background. A shape, translucent and indistinct, like heat, shimmer, or a trick of the light. Tall, impossibly tall, with too many joints in the limbs. And it was closer in each subsequent photo. I scrolled back through the gallery, watching the progression. In the earliest photos from last night, the shape was barely visible, just a hint of distortion at the edge of the frame. But with each image, it had become more solid, more defined, moving closer to me. In the most recent photo, the one showing me screaming, it was less than 6 feet away, close enough to touch. I heard a sound then, not footsteps, something else, a soft mechanical clicking like a camera shutter. Over and over, click, click, click. It was all around me, above me, beside me, photographing me from every angle, invisible, relentless. I ran again. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, and I collapsed in the snow. As I lay there, I felt my phone buzz again and again and again. New photos flooding my gallery, hundreds of them, thousands maybe, all of me. All taken from places nothing should be standing. I don't know how I got out. My memory of the next few hours is fragmented and strange. I remember getting back to the road somehow. I remember a logging truck stopping, the driver's concerned face, his questions I couldn't answer. I remember him helping me into his truck, driving me to the nearest town. I remember him asking if I wanted him to call the police, and I couldn't explain what to tell them. What could I say? Something invisible was photographing me. There were pictures from impossible angles. They'd think I'd had a breakdown. Maybe I had. I got a motel room. I deleted every photo from my phone and camera. All of them. Not just the ones from the cabin, but everything. Every image I'd ever taken. I couldn't stand to look at photographs anymore, but they came back. The next morning, my gallery had new photos. Photos taken in the motel room while I slept. Photos of me in the shower. Photos taken from above the bed, from the corners of the room, from inside the closet. It had followed me. That was 3 months ago. I don't use my phone's camera anymore. I sold all my professional equipment. I quit photography entirely, but it doesn't matter. My gallery still gets new photos every day, dozens of them. Me at work, me at home, me walking down the street, taken from every conceivable angle. Sometimes the distorted shape is visible in the background, getting clearer and more solid with each passing week. I think it's learning how to be seen. Using my own camera, my own phone, to figure out how to exist in a way that's visible to people. Each photo is practice, refinement, getting the details right. In yesterday's photos, you can almost make out a face. Almost. I don't know what it wants, I don't know what it is, but I know that when it's finally solid enough to be fully visible, when it's finished learning how to look human, it won't need to photograph me anymore. It'll be able to do something else instead. I keep my phone's camera covered now, tape over both lenses, but the photos still appear. Somehow it doesn't need my camera anymore. It's learned to create the images itself, putting them directly in my gallery like gifts I never asked for. The most recent photo from this morning shows me sleeping, but this time, there's something new in the frame. A hand, too long, fingers in the wrong places, reaching toward my face, almost touching. The metadata says the photo was taken at 4:17 a.m. I was sleeping at 4:17 a.m. I didn't wake up when it touched me. I don't think I'll wake up next time either. Story 8. I found the guest book and my name was already in it. The guest book had my signature in it, dated 6 months from now, and below it someone had written a warning I'd already ignored. The cabin wasn't listed online anywhere. I'd found it through word of mouth, a friend of a colleague who knew someone looking to rent their family property for cheap. The owner, a man who only communicated through terse emails, sent me directions and a key code. No contract, no deposit, just a Venmo payment and a set of GPS coordinates. I should have known something was off about that. But I was desperate to get away, and desperate people don't ask enough questions. The cabin was deep in the Smoky Mountains, so remote that the last mile of road was barely a road at all. Just 2 tire ruts through overgrown grass and brambles. The cabin itself was older than I'd expected, probably built in the 40s or 50s, with log walls weathered to gray and a tin roof patched with mismatched sheets of metal. Inside, it was surprisingly well maintained. The furniture was dated but clean, the wood stove functional, the bed made with fresh linens. On the kitchen table sat a binder with instructions and information, and next to it a leather-bound book with guest log embossed on the cover in faded gold letters. I'd seen guest books before in rentals. They're usually filled with cheerful entries. Wonderful stay, amazing views. Will definitely return. I opened this one out of curiosity while waiting for my coffee to brew. The entries went back decades. The first one was from 1978, written in careful cursive. First stay in our new cabin. Beautiful and peaceful. The Morrison family. After that, entries appeared sporadically, once or twice a year in the early decades, more frequently in recent years. All positive, all unremarkable. I flipped toward the back, curious if anyone had written anything recently. The most recent entry was from 2 months ago. A couple from Tennessee, 4-night stay, loved the hiking trails. I was about to close the book when I noticed something that made my heart stop. 3 entries from the bottom, dated 6 months in the future. April 7th next year was my signature. My handwriting, unmistakable and exact. My full name, Jordan Casey. I stared at it, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. That was impossible. Today was October 12th. The entry was dated April 7th. That date hadn't happened yet. But there was my name in my handwriting, as clear as anything I'd ever written. Below my signature, in the same handwriting, I had written, 1 week stay, arrived Friday. The cabin is beautiful, but something feels wrong. There's a presence here I can't explain. I wish I'd listened to the warnings. I wish I'd left when I had the chance. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the book. I read the entry again, and again. It didn't change. My name, my handwriting, a date that hadn't happened yet. I flipped back through the book looking for some explanation, some proof this was a prank. But the entries before mine looked genuine. Different handwriting, different styles, decades of authentic signatures. And the entries after mine. There was one more entry after mine, dated April 11th, 4 days after my supposed arrival. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible. Jordan never checked out. Owner came to investigate. Found the guest book open to this page. No sign of Jordan. Search continues. I slammed the book shut. My breath was coming in short, panicked gasps. This was insane, impossible. I'd never been here before. This was my first time at this cabin. I couldn't have written an entry dated 6 months from now, and I certainly hadn't disappeared. I opened my laptop, searching for any information about the cabin, the owner, missing persons in this area. I found nothing. No news articles, no warnings, no record of anyone disappearing from this property. I called the owner. It went straight to voicemail, a generic automated message, not even personalized. I left a message asking him to call me back immediately, that something strange was going on. I should have left right then, driven back to civilization and never returned. But I didn't, because the rational part of my brain was insisting there had to be an explanation. Someone was messing with me. The owner had some sick sense of humor. It was a prank, a setup, something. I told myself I'd stay one night, and if anything else weird happened, I'd leave in the morning. That first night was uneventful. I made dinner, read by the wood stove, went to bed early. I kept the guest book on the kitchen table, but I didn't open it again. I didn't want to see my signature, my handwriting, that impossible date. I woke up around 3 a.m. to complete silence. Not the peaceful silence of a quiet place, the oppressive silence of something held breath, something waiting. I lay in bed listening to absolutely nothing, feeling increasingly unsettled. Then I heard pages turning, slow, deliberate, the sound of paper sliding against paper. The guest book was in the kitchen. I was alone in the cabin, but someone was turning its pages. I got out of bed and walked slowly toward the kitchen, my heart hammering. The cabin was dark except for moonlight through the windows. As I approached the kitchen, the sound stopped. The guest book was lying open on the table. I'd left it closed. Now it was open to the page with my signature. Except now there was more. Below the entry about me not checking out, someone had added a new line in fresh ink. She's still here. She never left. I grabbed the book and ran to the car, not even bothering to pack, not caring about my things. I was done. This was too much. I'd deal with the owner later, get my money back, whatever. I just needed to leave. The car wouldn't start. Dead battery, though it had been fine yesterday. I tried again and again. Nothing. I sat there in the driver's seat, breathing hard, trying to think. The cabin was miles from anywhere, no cell service, no landline inside. I was trapped here until morning, when I could either walk out or figure out what was wrong with the car. I went back inside, locked every door and window, pushed furniture against the doors. Then I sat on the couch with the guest book in my lap, forcing myself to read through it more carefully. I started noticing things I'd missed before. Every 20 or 30 entries, there would be one that stood out. Same pattern, someone's signature, a date, then a comment about the cabin feeling wrong or about a presence they couldn't explain. And then entries shortly after mentioning that person never checked out or disappeared. I counted 7 of them going back over the decades. 7 people who'd come to this cabin, signed the guest book, and then apparently vanished. All of their entries were dated in the future from when they actually stayed. Like the guest book knew what would happen to them before it happened. I found one from 1983. David Richardson. The cabin is beautiful, but I feel watched. Something isn't right. I'm leaving first thing tomorrow. 3 entries later. David Richardson never checked out. Police investigation ongoing, no leads. Another from 2001. Rachel Kim, 3rd night here. Can't shake the feeling I've been here before, seeing things in my peripheral vision. The guest book had my name in it before I signed it. How is that possible? 2 entries later. Rachel Kim's family came looking for her. Found her car, but no sign of Rachel. Guest book was open to her page. The pattern repeated, over and over. Every few years, someone would come to this cabin, find their name already in the guest book, dated in the future, write about feeling wrong or watched, and then vanish. And now, my name was in the book, dated April 7th, 6 months from now. But I was here now in October, which meant I didn't finish the thought. I couldn't. I stayed awake all night, sitting on that couch, watching the kitchen table where the guest book lay. Around 5 a.m., I watched the book open by itself. Slowly, like invisible hands were lifting the cover. The pages turned one by one until they stopped at my entry. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. I was trapped in the cabin until daylight, when I could walk to the main road and flag down help. As I watched, words began to appear on the page. Not written by a pen, just materializing on the paper, letter by letter in my handwriting. It's October 12th. I thought I was here for the first time, but the book knew I was coming. The book always knows. I'm starting to understand that time works differently here, that maybe I've been here before, or I will be here, or I'm always here. Maybe all of us who disappeared never really left. Maybe we're all still here, writing in this book, trying to warn the next person. I hadn't written that. I was across the room watching it appear. But it was my handwriting, my words, my thoughts. More words appeared. If you're reading this, if your name is in the book with a future date, leave now. Don't wait until morning. Don't try to understand. Just run. Because once the book has your name, once you've seen yourself in its pages, you're already trapped. You've always been trapped. You'll always be here in this cabin, writing warnings that no one will listen to. The sun finally rose. I grabbed my bag and ran outside, leaving everything else. The morning was clear and cold. the forest peaceful and normal. I started walking down the dirt road toward civilization, moving as fast as I could. I'd gotten maybe a quarter mile when I realized I'd left my car keys. I'd need them eventually. Even if I couldn't start the car now, I'd need to come back with help. I stood there debating, before finally turning around to go back. The cabin was gone. I was standing in the right spot. I could see my footprints in the dirt leading here. But where the cabin should have been, there was just forest. Old forest, undisturbed, like nothing had ever been built here. I searched for hours, walking in expanding circles, looking for any sign of the cabin. Nothing, just trees and undergrowth and the sound of birds. Eventually, I made it to the main road and flagged down a car. The driver took me to the nearest town. I tried to explain what happened. The cabin, the guest book, my name dated in the future. The police were polite but clearly skeptical. They drove me back to the coordinates I'd been given. We found nothing but forest. The owner's email address bounced. The Venmo payment had gone through to an account that no longer existed. There was no record of anyone owning property at those coordinates. It's been 3 weeks since this happened. I'm home now, trying to convince myself it was some kind of breakdown, a hallucination, stress-induced psychosis. But I know what I saw. I know what I read. And yesterday a package arrived at my apartment. No return address, no note. Inside was a leather-bound book with guest log embossed on the cover. I haven't opened it yet. I'm afraid of what I'll find inside. I'm afraid I'll see my signature dated April 7th, 6 months from now. I'm afraid there will be new entries written in my handwriting describing things that haven't happened yet. Because here's what I've realized. That date in the guest book, April 7th, 6 months in the future, I'd already planned to take a trip that week. I'd requested the time off work weeks ago, before I ever found this cabin. I'd been planning to rent a cabin somewhere for a week, somewhere quiet and isolated. The guest book wasn't predicting the future. It was showing me a future that had already been decided. A loop I was already caught in. And in 3 months, on April 7th, I'm going to wake up with an irresistible urge to drive to those coordinates. I'll find the cabin there, real and solid. I'll go inside and sign the guest book, not realizing I've signed it before. I'll write about how something feels wrong, how there's a presence I can't explain. And then I'll disappear, just like David Richardson, Rachel Kim, and all the others. The book is sitting on my coffee table right now, unopened. Sometimes late at night I hear pages turning. I haven't looked. I'm afraid if I open it, if I see my signature again, it will make it real. It will lock me into that future. But I know it's already too late. The moment I found my name in that guest book, my future was sealed. April 7th is coming, and when it arrives, I'll drive to those coordinates and the cabin will be waiting. It's always been waiting, and it always will be, because time doesn't work the same way there. At that cabin, in that guest book, every moment exists simultaneously. Every person who disappeared is still there, still signing their names, still writing warnings that won't change anything. I'm already there. I'm there right now, writing in the guest book, trying to warn whoever comes next. And they won't listen. Because the book already knows. The book always knows. It knows what you'll do before you do it. And once your name is written in its pages, once you've seen your own handwriting dated months in the future, you're already gone. You were always gone. You'll always be there.